everyone take a seat, please? Welcome everyone to the Empowerment Through Information session. I'm Norma Loeb, and this is
Gigante. Welcome everyone to lovely Newcastle. Today we have amazing presentations happening, and the first speaker would like to introduce is Rachel Thompson, and I will let her introduce herself because her title and everything she does is a long list. And so welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. So apologies, I'm going to stand in front of you. So lovely to be here. My name is Rachel Thompson. I work as a consultant Admiral Nurse. Welcome to people online. Absolutely privileged to be here. For those of you who don't know what an Admiral Nurse is, we are doing a session, myself and my colleague Rachel, who's sat over there, tomorrow afternoon. But essentially we're dementia specialist nurses supported by the charity Dementia UK, which is a UK-based charity. And we work to support families. We recognise that people affected by dementia, both the people with the condition and families desperately need support. I have specialised in Lewy Body Dementia. I've worked in dementia care for over 25 years. And I specialised in Lewy Body Dementia 2.5 years ago, funded by the Lewy Body Society. And I have to say, I am still on the learning curve. It is an incredibly complex condition. So my job today, in 5 minutes apparently, is to give you an overview. So that's quite a challenge, isn't it? We're then going to go on to talk to some of the various symptoms that people are affected by. So, over. So just as an overview about the main causes or types of dementia, and some of this may be very familiar to you, so apologies. But there are probably over 200 causes or types of dementia, with Lewy body dementia being, we think, approximately between 10 and 15%. We also recognise that it is underdiagnosed, incredibly, and we still have got lots to learn. I'm not going to talk to you about all the various different types of dementia, because really what we're here today is about Lewy body dementia, isn't it? But we do know, for example, that certainly people who've lived with dementia for a long time are likely to have a mixed dementia. And certainly with Lewy body dementia, we think there's probably some Alzheimer's pathologies for people who've lived for a while. But there's lots of other types of dementia, some that affect more people who are what we call under 65. Although we debate whether that's old or not. It's shifting, isn't it? But as we say, we're going on to talk about Lewy body dementia today. So this phrase, the most common disease you've never heard of, which was coined by the Lewy Body Society, because it's still under-recognised. I feel like I've learned lots, but I still know out there in healthcare, in social care, in the general public, people still haven't really heard of Lewy body dementia, or if they have, they don't really understand what it means. So it's the second most common cause of neurodegenerative dementias, and I've said about 10 to 15%, with a range of symptoms, and it is probably, I think, one of the most complex causes of dementia. Now, I've highlighted what we call the core features in bold. I don't know if you can see them very well. But essentially, we're talking about difficulty with attention and visual spatial perception. This is particularly the cognitive changes that's slightly different to some of the other types of dementia. Fluctuations in cognition is a real hallmark, where people can change from moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day. And this is, I think, particularly frustrating both for people with the condition and also families, because it's very puzzling. Sleep disturbance in all sorts of ways, but particularly REM sleep behaviour disorder, which is what we call the dream enactment, where people, with their arms, their limbs will move about in the middle of the night. But there are lots of other sleep disturbance things that can happen. And that's what I heard somebody say the other day, you have a bad night, it makes for a bad day, and of course sleep is so essential to our health and our well-being. I'm going to talk about visual hallucinations in a moment, but this is a particular feature of Lewy body. Now, of course, the relationship with Parkinson's comes in here, and I'll talk about why that is. But the movement, the motor control, the Parkinsonian symptoms, which are classically gait, tremor, and rigidity, slightly different depending on whether we've got Parkinson's first or dementia with Lewy bodies first. There's a whole range of autonomic nervous system symptoms that we talk about: constipation, increased urination, excess sweating. People often talk about a loss of smell, of taste, or sometimes a strange function around smell and taste. Systemised delusions, I mentioned capgras as a particular type of misidentification. Anxiety, depression, apathy, there's a long list, isn't there? I think what I'd like to stress is that not everybody will experience all of these symptoms, and everybody is very different, but certainly the ones that are highlighted in bold are the core features. It does seem to progress quicker than other types of dementia. We think this is probably due to the complexity and some of the Parkinsonian symptoms that can contribute to certainly later stages. So, next slide. Okay. What are Lewy bodies? There's a lovely picture of one there. They're abnormal protein deposits that clump together. They were discovered by Frederick Lewy, who discovered them in a Parkinson's patient back in 1912. They're made up of this protein called alpha-synuclein. It's a misfolding of a protein in the brain that can lead to clumping and stops the neurons from working. Or in fact, sometimes the neurons can die. But this leads, one of the things that happens is a loss of production of what really essential neurotransmitters. So predominantly acetylcholine and dopamine. Okay, I will speed up that way. So where are the Lewy bodies found? Well, it does depend on whether you have. So in Parkinson's disease, you may find Lewy bodies in what we call the midbrain and the brainstem. And as you see on the left-hand side, this part of the brain is really essential in movement, in regulating sleep, in maintaining alertness. So hopefully you're starting to see where some of the symptoms originate from. Whereas in Lewy body dementia, they're much more diffuse. So we find Lewy bodies in the cerebral cortex and also perhaps in the brainstem as well. And this will, the experience of whether Lewy bodies are predominantly will probably influence the symptoms of some of the experiences. So terminology, next slide. It's puzzling because you will see, and still in diagnosis, people use different terms. And I don't know internationally how it's described, but certainly in the UK, and this is the work that's come from Ian McKeith and colleagues up in Newcastle, that we talk about Lewy body disease as the underpinning cause. Now, if they end up in certain parts of the brain, it leads to Parkinson's disease. And some people who live with Parkinson's for a long time, so the longer you live with Parkinson's, the more likely you are to develop dementia. And we call that Parkinson's disease dementia. Whereas if you have Lewy bodies that end up in the cerebral cortex in different parts of the brain, then you're probably more likely to be diagnosed with dementia Lewy bodies or DLB. But the umbrella term collectively we use in the UK as Lewy body dementia. So there's one year rule that was coined by Ian McKeith again with colleagues. Parkinson's disease dementia, where dementia starts 1 year or more after a fairly well-established diagnosis of Parkinson's, whereas dementia with Lewy bodies, what we'd be looking for probably is dementia changes in cognition, dementia that occurs either before or sometimes at the same time as Parkinson's symptoms. And the trick is asking the right questions, I think. When people present with symptoms, and sometimes when we go back, people say, well, actually, yes, I have had problems with sleep, and sleep disturbances, one things often can happen a long time before actually any of the symptoms emerge. So, that was my whistle-stop tour. I'm going to cut down my next bit to accommodate. So I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about hallucinations and delusions. So, visual perceptual changes, we know that a certain part of the brain can be affected, and the wiring in the brain, we don't really know, fully understand exactly why these happen, but if we think that vision is an active process, so next slide. So here's a picture of some bricks, next slide, where you can see. So if we just, can you just go back one? So once you've seen that cigar sticking out the wall, you can't unsee it, yeah? Does that make sense? So if you can do that back again. So this is, when we're thinking about vision, it's informed by our memory, by our experiences. So next slide. Now, something called illusions and pareidolia. This is something that actually is very, very common, actually. So our brain often tries to make sense of things. So I don't know how many of you can see faces, perhaps fairly obvious in the ladder. Cloud, that's fairly obvious. Perhaps slightly less obvious, but there's a face in the tree. Something we all do. It's, again, quite common. And sometimes, but as things develop, so it doesn't necessarily mean we have Lewy body that happens, that's just a normal thing that we all do. But for people with Lewy body dementia, the changes in the brain can start to lead to misinterpretation of visual information. So the brain wiring becomes faulty, but we don't think there's a single brain region that's involved. Kind of certain research I was listening to the other day was talking about the messages between the back of the brain and the front of the brain. But both sensory input, our memory, our understanding of vision, and our interpretation of information are affected. And this is what can lead to hallucinations. So visual hallucinations I'm going to talk about mostly, but you can get hallucinations in other what we call modalities. So auditory, which is hearing, and sometimes the olfactory, sometimes people describe a change of smell or taste. Minor hallucinations, and I've heard people talk about this in kind of earlier stages. I was just talking to Daniel Duback, who's going to be speaking tomorrow, who's in the audience, about both passage hallucinations, which occur inside the vision, the sense that you can glance and think there's somebody there, but can feel very real, or the sense of presence, the sense that there's somebody there, that when you look around there isn't anybody. So this is something that can be described by people earlier on. The complex visual hallucinations, which is what we call the core features, one of the hallmarks, about between 70 and 80% of people with Lewy body dementia will experience this. So again, not everybody, but certainly a good percentage. They're usually complex, they're usually well-formed, they're often recurring, so it's not chaotic, it's often a theme. They are more common in the evening at night, probably because of the light changes, but also people are tired. So the brain is not kind of functioning quite so well. Often animals, people, children, they're often colourful, they'll be three-dimensional. Now, this is a painting by Charles Doyle, which kind of vividly kind of portrays some perhaps quite disturbing, difficult hallucinations. Some people may describe actually just having people in the room, and they're not actually that disturbed by it, whereas for other people, they're really very distressing. So, next slide. So this is a new film that's been funded by the Alzheimer's Research UK and with Rare Dementia support in London. And they've done as animation, it's available online, so I would urge you to have a little look. It's been developed by people with the condition and their family carers and vividly portrays how it feels. So I'm going to show you a small clip from the next slide, if that's okay. Okay.
Can I talk about my family? My pretend family. The children live with me. Pretend little children. They didn't talk. I used to say, look, we could have such fun together. Why don't you talk to me?
I'd ask questions like, well, what do they wear? And then she said, that's a good question because I don't really know what they wear. And I'd find food around the house.
And I treated them like proper children. And I gave them each a little biscuit at milk time. I mean, they really were there. I gave them pen and pencils to see if they could write or scribble or anything. But they were still exactly as I left it when I came back.
I think we often forget the nature of the person, but what we're actually seeing is an amazing woman trying to care with all the love and attention on these children.
This family meant a lot to me. I believed it wholeheartedly.
Lewy Body Society and Dementia UK about tips for managing hallucinations. There's a range of things to think about, but certainly thinking about the environment, things that may be easily misidentified, thinking about lighting is really important. Ruling out physical causes, so delirium, which is an infection or vitamin deficiency or constipation, remember that people, when they're later on in the evening, are more likely to, this is more likely to happen. There is advice about medication. We think the cholinesterase inhibitors can help reduce hallucinations. Thinking about Parkinson's medication, I think we heard earlier on, that can make hallucinations worse. If somebody is very distressed, I'm thinking about the use of perhaps some what we call atypical antipsychotics. We're having talks tomorrow about medications. I'm not going to go into massive detail. But just finding out how disturbing and distressing that is for the person is really important. And helping, if somebody's got some insight, just asking them, are you seeing things that other people can't? Is your brain playing tricks on you? Get them to check out reality, but acknowledge. I think it's often say to families is don't ignore, because we sometimes want to kind of bring that person back, and actually just acknowledging that's very real for them. That's one of the most important things we can do. And maybe distraction may help. So I'm going to really have to skip through these, but I'm going to mention about delusions in Lewy Body Dementia. Right? We think delusion is a false belief that's not based on reality. It may be fixed, but it often can fluctuate in Lewy Body Dementia because of the fluctuations we see anyway. There are different types of delusions. Some of them are less common in Lewy Body. Certainly delusions of infidelity and Othello syndrome is something that people mention. Delusions of misidentification. I'm going to talk a bit about cat grass. There's something called Frugoli syndrome. He was an impersonator. There's where people see copies of people in crowds. And then clonal pluralization, which is multiple copies of objects, places, or people. I think enough to say this is often quite distressing. We see that, how difficult it is. So cat grass is what we call a delusion of misidentification. It's often linked to hallucinations and perceptions, and people often describe there's several versions of the same person, particularly husband and wife or partners. There may be a good version and a bad version, and sometimes it's depending on what's going on. So I've heard families say to me, well, actually, when my husband's cross with me, I'm the bad person, I'm the bad wife, or actually when we're getting on well and things are okay, I'm the good wife. And so this can really, really vary. Tics are quite similar, really, but I think the thing is that just one of the things that, and again, trying out different things can help. So trying to find out how fixed it is can you shift it slightly, ask gentle questions, don't ignore, don't disagree. Thinking about encouraging familiarity, so perhaps sometimes talking as you go into the room. I've heard a family carer say, I used to sometimes go upstairs and change my top and come back down again, and it was okay again. So there's not one solution often. It's a bit of trial and error. But seek advice and support, I think, if things are getting distressing. So I think that is probably enough for me. I'm sorry for over a couple of minutes. There's the leaflets I've mentioned, there's some upstairs on the stand. I've got a couple with me, that you can download them from the Lewy Body Society website. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for that. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Helen Bundy.
Hopefully you have the video, because this isn't going to be a live presentation. This is going to be a taped presentation. My co-presenter, Kevin Quaid, actually is out of the country. He'd hoped to make it back today, but unable to. And say a little prayer for him because he's unwell right now. But what we are talking about today is sleep. And specifically, we're going to deal with REM behavior disorder. So I'm going to let our video kind of speak for itself. And if there's a question or so after, maybe we can address it then. Thank you.
Good day to all those attending the Living with Lewy session. My name is Helen Bundy Medsger. I am a former LBD caregiver for 2 generations of my family, a current LBD advocate, a peer mentor, and support group facilitator in the United States. Today, we are speaking with Kevin Quaid from County Limerick, Ireland, who was diagnosed at the age of 53 with young onset Lewy body dementia. Kevin, though, has not sat idle since learning of his diagnosis and has devoted himself to working to destigmatize dementia. He has become a staunch advocate for those living with progressive neurocognitive diseases, and currently is a member of the Irish Dementia Working Group, vice chair of the European Working Group of People with Dementia, co-founder of Lewy Body Ireland, and the author of 2 books chronicling his journey with Lewy. His first book, Lewy Body Dementia, Survival and Me, was the first book ever written by someone diagnosed with Lewy body. He has since completed the recently released I Am Kevin, Not Lewy. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Helen. It's so good to be here. It really is at a Lewy Body conference. I never thought I'd live to see today.
I know. We're both blessed, aren't we? So our topic today, our topic today is sleep, the lived experience. As many of you are aware, sleep disorders known as parasomnias are common in Lewy body dementia. In fact, the most prominent one we will address today is REM sleep behavior disorder, and it's referred to as both RSBD or RBD. According to the Sleep Foundation, REM sleep behavior disorder is a condition characterized by sudden body movements and vocalizations while a person experiences vivid dreams during their REM sleep cycle. During normal REM sleep, the body experiences temporary muscle paralysis. It's known as atonia. While the brain slows, activity similar to wakefulness occurs. Blood pressure rises, breathing becomes irregular, and the eyes dart in all directions, hence the term rapid eye movement. The temporary paralysis of REM sleep allows us to dream safely, lying still while the brain is still active. But for individuals with REM sleep behavior disorder, normal muscle paralysis doesn't occur, enabling the person to physically act out their dreams. REM sleep, RBD, can manifest as small muscle twitches and quiet sleep talking to loud shouting, to punching, to kicking, grabbing their bed partner, and jumping out of bed. Interestingly, the dreams associated with REM sleep behavior disorder are often intense and frightening. Individuals may dream about being chased or attacked, and they can unknowingly enact the dream in real life. Most individuals who experience RBD do so several years prior to diagnosis of their Lewy body disease. So Kevin, please tell us when and how you first experienced REM sleep disorder. What were your first symptoms?
It was something I was thinking about today, and thinking back on it, I think it was probably my early 50s, because I have a sleep apnea machine at night, which I'll speak about a bit in a moment. But before that, I was having nights where I'd have very disturbing, what I call nightmares. And I wondered the following day, why did I dream like that? Or I put it down to maybe a bad day at work or something like that. And that was in my very early 50s, maybe say 49, 50. And they progressed, and I was diagnosed with Parkinson's first. And then I was diagnosed at 53 with Lewy body disease. And they had got progressively worse at that stage.
All right. So I know that it's important to report these types of symptoms to your physician. And if available, they may schedule you for an overnight sleep study called a polysomnography. Did you go through a sleep study? What was it like?
One thing about it is I did, but not after being diagnosed with Lewy body disease. It was long before, when I had the sleep apnea, and I also had asthma. And I had the REM sleep behavior disorder, and I was moving around so much in the bed, and they wanted to know what was going on. So I had that study then.
Okay.
Like a lot of things, I never really got an answer until I was diagnosed.
Ah,
When I went to my neurologist and I talked to her about the hallucinations and the nightmares and that, even before I went for the DET scan, she knew what was wrong with me. She knew what was the cause.
oh my. So historically, you'd already had the sleep study, and then tying that together with all your other symptoms brought around the diagnosis.
Yeah, but it took years to complete the
Cycle. My goodness. I think that's probably common with most everybody. It takes a while to connect those dots. So over the years, how did your RBD manifest itself?
I'd love to tell everyone they got better, but they haven't. And I often say to Helena, who's my wife and my full-time carer, I wonder what hell are they going to send me to tonight?
Yeah.
Because the dreams or the nightmares, or whatever you want to call them, are as real as I'm sitting here today, I'm looking at you today. They're that vivid, they're that clear. I don't want to upset anyone, and I don't want to make anyone feel ill or bad, but it's constantly about I'm murdering someone. Or as late as the other night, I had one where I was trying to strangle this woman and I couldn't hear her neck snap.
Mm.
There was a night that I had murdered someone and I had wrapped the body in plastic and buried it. And I remember moving it one night. As I speak to you, I can remember it now as clear as day.
Yeah.
And the smell. I got up the following morning at 9 o'clock. And at 3 o'clock that evening, I was wide awake. I was sitting up on the couch. At 3 o'clock that evening, my wife had to go to the health shop to get orange essence oil and put them to the bottom of my nose to get rid of the smell of the rotten crops. I had no idea what a rotten crop smells like, but that's what was in my head. And I kept thinking to myself, oh my God, I have friends in the police, I have friends who are businessmen, if they knew what I was after doing. And for a long time during the day, them dreams will stay with me. And I'm wondering which is real and which is not real. So you have to cope with it. No, yes. I don't have them every single night. But every night I do have dreams that disturb me. There are nights where I'll wake and I just crawl up like that in the bed and I will cry because I will not know who I am. I will not know where I am. I will not know who's alongside me, and I'm terrified to ask. And that is, it's frightening. It's very, very frightening. And for anyone that has Lewy Body dementia, they know the fear that goes with it anyway. So you add this into it as well. And it's hard to believe it, isn't it? And I speaking today that I can be that way maybe in 5 or 6 hours' time when I go to bed.
Right. Yes. Well, I just wonder, I'm sure that this has also been hard on your wife, Helena. So what accommodations have the two of you had to make to be able to have you and she sleep safely?
Well, there's one machine I spoke about earlier, the sleep apnea machine. I have that from the side of my bed. There's a hose in that. So it kind of limits my movement as such. And to be honest with you, I think Helena kind of sleeps with one eye open. There are days that she is exhausted and she will go to sleep on the couch. But we have done, when I wrote my first book, Lewy Body Dementia Survival and Me, as a family, we sat down and we did our forward planning, right?
Very good.
Unfortunately, if I act out one of these nightmares and I accidentally hit Helena, because it would never be on purpose. It wasn't the way I was reared. I believe a man should never lay a hand on a woman in anger. End of story. That conversation is over. It doesn't go any further. But if I do, then we have decided we go to separate bedrooms. And if it gets to a stage where I do during the day when I'm like I am now, then I have to go to a care home facility. Not only do I know it, my wife knows it, and my kids know it. We have that discussion made. And everyone should do forward planning anyway. we have that done.
Kevin, I think that is huge advice for people to have the discussions early on. It makes it less of a crisis when things come about. So I commend you and your family.
Yeah, well, you see, I have 3 kids. I have three stepkids. Half of our family are in Australia, half of our family are here. Can you imagine the day that I would get violent? Then the kids in Australia have to be contacted, a meeting has to be had. What do we do with Dad? We don't know what he wants. He's not feeling great. He's not making sense. The decisions are made.
Yeah.
They know what they want.
Yeah.
You know, everything is in place. And it's a load off for my back. It's a load off of Helena's back.
Yeah.
And it's a load off of my kids' back.
Again, I commend you all for being very forward thinking. It's wise. So I'm wondering though, so you and Helena have come up with your strategies, but what has your doctor been able to provide in the way of any therapies to kind of help lessen the severity of your RBD?
Well, I'm only on two medications at night. I take Rivotril.
Mm-hmm.
I started off this time last year. I think I was only on 2, the 0.5. I'm now on 8. I can go as far as 14, so it's a little bit frightening that the scale is tipped. And I'm on one donizepam for my hallucinations. And the thing about them is, when my neurologist increases the dose of them, it lessens the severity of the nightmares. So is that I'm going to her again shortly, and I know that she will increase the dose ever so slightly. But there's little things, there's very, very simple little things that you can do. Is that when I wake in the middle of the night, I used to wake in a completely dark room. I no longer do that. We have this night light that changes color. So if I walk to the ordinary, when I wake and I'm so afraid that I don't know where I am, and there's this white light, then it goes red, then it goes yellow, then it goes blue, then it goes green. Believe it or not, that brings me back. That gets my mind thinking, what is this? Do I remember where I am? Do I remember who I am? But I still might not know who Helena is.
Yes.
But it's her voice that reassures me. And all she has to do is say that I'm okay and that I'm safe.
Very good. Verbal cueing, yes. Yeah, verbal cueing and the auditory sense cannot always, but it's a great strategy for a variety of things within Lewy body symptoms. So some people step out of the room just because the visual cue isn't always accurate, but auditory cues tend to have more success. So that's great. You've worked on some things. So I'm wondering, I know we need to wrap up here in a moment. So I'm just wondering, do you have any additional advice for those here today?
Don't ever go to bed without your iPhone alongside you and something like Netflix and a comedy. Because I will tell you this much, The Big Bang Theory has 12 years. There isn't an episode I can't quote a line in. So when I'm after one of my bad dreams, my bad nights, I wake up and Helena reassures me who I am. I put on the headphones, I lie down, I'll watch it, and I'll go back to sleep laughing.
That's great.
I might go back into another horrific dream, but before I go back into it, I'll go into it laughing. Make sure you have a comedy, make sure you have music you like, make sure that you have something that you can look at, listen to, and hear. Something from the past that will make you laugh, that will make you happy, that will comfort you. You know, it's like, how do you put the baby to sleep?
That's right.
Their favorite lullaby.
Very good. Oh, Kevin, that's just tremendous advice. A little laughter will bring, a little joy every day is what all of us need. So I want to thank Kevin for sharing all of the significant challenges that you've had experiencing, RBD. But as I conclude, as we kind of come to our end here, I want to share one more important note. And that's, please, those living with Lewy body dementia should not take any medication or any sleep-inducing substances without first seeking the advice of your physician. Even those considered, whether it be natural, organic, sold over the counter, everything should be cleared by your physician. So those with LBD can be extremely sensitive to drugs, or they may interact with your existing medications or cause significant side effects. So now that we're done, I want to thank everybody for attending today's session, and we wish you a great remainder of your day. Thanks, Kevin. Bye-bye.
Talk to you guys later.
I think in conclusion, I wish Kevin was here, and I'm sure he wishes he was here too. But sleep is a really important factor for any of us, whether we're well or whether we have a neurodegenerative disease. And most importantly, now Kevin talked about pulling his screen out in the middle of the night. That one I'm going to counter a little bit, because screens put off a wide variety of radiation and input, when in fact, according to the Sleep Foundation and most sleep disorder specialists, an hour and a half before sleep, screens should be put away so that the brain can quiet itself. So that's the only qualifier I'm going to give you on this. But certainly a little gentle music through earphones can help. But there is an entire what we call sleep hygiene criteria that if you don't have it, certainly look it up, Google it. And sleep hygiene is very, very important. Thank you so much.
Now we'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Goldman and Shirley Ryan. And this topic will be about motor symptoms.
Great, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. Can everyone hear me? Okay, wonderful. You'll drive the slides? Okay. Well, I think it's perfect to talk about movement after we had the opportunity to move around a little bit and breathe and relax. So as Norma said, my name is Jennifer Goldman. I'm a movement disorder neurologist, but I'm also a movement disorder neurologist who specialized in behavior and cognition. So I wear a number of different hats, and I've been working in the field of Parkinson's and Lewy Body Dementia for now almost, believe it or not, 2 decades. And I have the privilege of directing our Center for Lewy Body Dementia and Parkinson's in Chicago. Next slide. So you've seen this umbrella. This is the US Lewy Body Dementia Association purple version of the polka dot umbrella to highlight that when we talk about Lewy body dementia, it encompasses both dementia with Lewy bodies and Parkinson's disease dementia. Next slide. Both of which can have motor symptoms, cognitive symptoms, behavioral changes, sleep disturbances, as you've heard about, and other symptoms related to blood pressure, constipation, and bladder function, which someone may talk about in some of the other sessions. With that said, I always think it's important in my talks to preface that they're kicking me off the stage already. You click okay. Keep it okay to keep it on.
Things on the TV, never hesitate. He's coming.
Okay. I think it's always important to remember that not everyone has the same symptoms, nor everyone has the same severity of symptoms. So people can be very unique in their presentations, some with more motor features, some with more cognitive and other features. But today I'm going to talk about motor symptoms. And if anyone would like copies of slides, I'm happy to share as well. When we think about Parkinsonism, which we most commonly associate with Parkinson's disease, as represented by a couple key features here. These are the medical terms. Bradykinesia just means slow movement as it gets translated, where movements are not as quick or as easy as they were at one point. They can be smaller, or they can start big and kind of fizzle and get smaller as someone makes movements. Some people can have tremor at rest, kind of shaking. It can be in different parts of the body, more commonly hands and legs. They can have rigidity or stiffness, which is something as a physician we check in the clinic by moving people's arms and legs around. And then of course we look at walking and balance. There are also other common symptoms that can go along with Parkinsonism, which are not part of our kind of big diagnostic floor over here, but people can have smaller handwriting. It might take them longer to get dressed or tie their shoes or cut their food. As people walk, they might not swing their arm as much. Sometimes that leads to shoulder pain. So often a clue if someone's been working with an orthopedic or physical therapist, that could be a really early sign. There may be changes in balance, freezing or getting stuck when walking, falling, softer speech, reduced facial expression, and then changes in swallowing, all of which are part of that motor paradigm. Again, not everyone has all these symptoms, but we use them to help establish diagnoses and to come up with different care plans for people, whether medications or therapies. So this is the criteria that I've been fortunate to be part of the groups that have helped develop over the years, pointing out that one of the core clinical features includes this Parkinsonism. Not everyone with DLB will have these motor features, but when they are present in the context of a cognitive disorder or decline, and often with other accompanying features, is a tip for the physician or healthcare provider to make that diagnosis clinically of dementia with Lewy bodies. This is where sometimes it gets tricky in the field as to, does someone have more motor features or more cognitive features, and what was the first symptom that started? So as a physician, when I encounter a new person in my clinic, I'm always interested in that history. What was the first symptom? What did you notice? What did your spouse or partner notice? What sorts of clues were there along the way? We heard about REM sleep behavior disorder 5, 10, 15 years, even before a tremor or walking or balance or cognitive symptom. Those history are clues. They're like puzzle pieces for us and as healthcare professionals to put it together to help people get the right diagnosis, which then leads us to hopefully the right therapies and treatment plan. So we know, you heard about the 1-year rule. Rachel presented that, but in some ways it's kind of which came first and which was the more prominent symptom. So if we think cognitive more first for DLB, motor in Parkinson's, with later development of, or simultaneously a motor, and then in Parkinson's, later development of cognitive symptoms. But I think it also depends on what door you come through, or maybe what bridge you cross here in Newcastle. But as a movement disorder specialist, I often see people who have a movement problem, not necessarily a cognitive problem first. But we know that people can have these simultaneously. We know that sometimes people might see a dementia specialist and they may or may not always pick up on some of those motor symptoms. So I think my other takeaway is keep knocking on all those doors to get to the right place at the right time. And I think we know that, unfortunately, it may take multiple doctor visits, 4 to even 7 physicians to get that diagnosis. So my message would be keep knocking down those doors, and in your care, you may need to see people from psychiatry or neurology or gastroenterology or sleep, all of whom have different doors here. So there are some subtle differences in the actual motor features that we can see. This is just a chart to outline it in a very simplified way. We talked about in Parkinson's, we might see motor features first, walking, balance, tremor, slowness, a little bit simultaneously or later in dementia with Lewy bodies. We may not see as much tremor in dementia with Lewy bodies. We may see some mixed changes in walking and balance, perhaps even less in terms of falls, although I think there's some debate as to whether that is entirely accurate. And that is one area where we will see in Parkinson's, but not necessarily in dementia with Lewy bodies, based on the history of course of the illness, but also the therapeutics and medications used. And those are what we call motor complications, where people may have extra involuntary movements. So if you've ever seen Michael J. Fox on television, or a good example of dyskinesias, or wearing off, we tend not to see them as much in dementia with Lewy bodies, a little bit by nature of the condition, but also we don't treat with the same amount of dopamine drugs that we think about in Parkinson's. A couple studies have tried to look at, are there different motor profiles? We heard in the scientific sessions this morning, trying to tease out different cognitive profiles between dementia with Lewy bodies, Parkinson's, or Alzheimer's. There may be some differences that we see where there may be a little bit more severity in the Lewy body performance on certain balance tests, or stride length, or hand dexterity. But again, these are really small numbers, so we have certainly more people in this room than were in this study. But as a clinician, we assess motor in a number of different ways. So if someone were seeing me in my clinic, we would do a number of different things. So I would watch someone walk, I look at how their arms swing, I look at their step pattern, I look to see, is it even, or is one side lagging? We do fine motor taps, so if anyone's ever done these are staple bread and butter of what I do every day. And we look to see, does the movement get small? Does it look symmetric from side to side? We look to see, how can someone get out of a chair and what their posture is like. And after our session with yoga, I feel like we should all be standing up straighter. So these are characteristic motor tests. So I would imagine that many clinical assessments might incorporate these, and if they haven't, might be consideration to assess those with your healthcare provider. Then there's a whole new field of wearables and sensors that can, like an Apple Watch or wristwatch device that can pick up tremor and look at walking patterns. So I think we'll see more on this in the coming decades. So why do we have these motor features in Lewy body dementia? Well, you heard about this Lewy body. This is a picture of the brain from a profile view. So our cortex up here, our brainstem, where the REM behavior disorder likes to cause some trouble, and the back part of our brain, the cerebellum, which is part of our motor control. And these Lewy bodies, these microscopic protein deposits that Rachel so nicely mentioned, kind of can be found in here, and they interfere with some of those motor signals. Some of the brain chemicals like dopamine that are used to transmit signals in a very fluid and normal fashion, to other brain chemicals and other changes in blood flow in areas that are part of our motor control centers. So we think that's part of the reason why people develop changes in their walking, tremor, and other movements. So to manage motor symptoms, so part of our role is to help make those diagnoses, but part of our role is to help people find treatments and therapeutics to address these symptoms, help them with their function, and help improve their quality of life, and enable them to do more of what they love to do and need to do. So I'm very fortunate to work in a team care setting. So with physicians, nurses, social workers, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, and we all play a role in addressing these motor symptoms. We can think about medications, sometimes more for Parkinson's surgery, like deep brain stimulation. I'm going to talk a little bit about non-pharm, and then I can't stress enough the importance of psychosocial support and research to help further the field. So I know tomorrow there's a talk on medicine, so I'm not going to cover all of this, but when we think about the motor symptoms, our main brain chemical that we're trying to address is something called dopamine. So there's a reduction in the amount of dopamine that causes some of these motor symptoms. And we try to replace that dopamine through different types of pills or medications. One which is probably most well known as a gold standard is something called levodopa, or carbidopa levodopa. In Europe, in other countries, there's some different names to that. And there have been some studies, including very early work I did in my career, looking at how does levodopa affect motor features like tremor and slowness from a beneficial standpoint, but also the downside to levodopa or dopamine is that it can sometimes trigger or exacerbate those visual hallucinations that Rachel talked about. What we found is that levodopa can help with some of the motor symptoms, but we really need to be cautious because many people who had motor benefits had increased what we call psychosis or hallucination symptoms. There are a number of side effects always to be aware of: confusion, hallucinations, low blood pressure, which is something we encounter, and sleepiness. There have been some other medications that have been looked at. There are a number of studies coming from Japan that have used a medication called Zodisamine. It's a seizure medicine. We don't fully understand actually how it works, but it's been used as a supplement or adjunct to levodopa or carbidopa levodopa, with some studies demonstrating benefit for motor function on the rating scales that I mentioned before. There's some medicines that I would argue against using. So it's kind of my public service announcement plugs here. There's certain newer dopamine medicines called dopamine agonists. They have different names in different countries, but one example would be pramipexole or ropinirole, and anticholinergics like trihexyphenidyl, benztropine. They can cause more confusion and hallucinations than are worth the effort. So those are on my no list. And then just some recent studies that have been looking at different aspects of GLD. So I think there are a couple key takeaways for here. I think it's okay to discuss using motor medications or dopaminergic medications with your physician and healthcare provider, but there's some caveats. So we generally use very, very little doses. So far, far less than often a typical person with Parkinson's is on. And we need to really balance the benefit for motor without worsening any sort of hallucination or delusion. And sometimes it's a really fine line. So I think it's important to establish the goals and expectations of what will these medicines do for me? You know, why should I be taking them? What should I expect? And understanding their pros and cons and side effects. And then to couple with non-pharmacologic therapy, I just wanted to spend a moment on non-medications. So we already heard a very lovely demonstration about yoga, and mindfulness, which I think are core to our therapeutics, but working with our therapists and the role of exercise. So I know there are global differences in how people access their care, but I'm a big proponent, an early advocate of getting involved and evaluated by a physical therapist, for movement, for everyday activities, for mobility, for safety, to reduce falls. Working with an occupational therapist. So many people don't know what an occupational therapist is. They might say, well, I'm not working, I don't have an occupation anymore. But occupations are what you do every day. It could be anything from knitting to housework to fine motor activity, even working on vision, working on cooking, activities of daily living. OTs, I think, make life easier. They find all the secret tricks and tips that just make it easier to get dressed or bathe or cook or clean. Speech therapists for volume of talking, for swallowing, and for cognition and communication, very important. And then exercise. So physical therapists, just as one example here, will look at a number of different assessments. So they'll look at people's posture. We know that people can have hunched posture or stooped posture. They look at strength, things we need to do to get up out of a chair or off a toilet seat, flexibility, coordination, and walking. And with those, they look at how changes in mobility might impact the person and their daily function. How do they affect getting in and out of bed? Getting up from a chair, as I mentioned. Energy levels and tolerance for activities. as well as walking and falls. And these are all areas that medications may have some effect, but I think physical therapy can have an extremely valuable effect on a person and their care partners in navigating these situations. It can also help look at someone's home. So, you know, we're always, I have to say, with telehealth and now being able to see inside people's homes, getting rid of things that people can trip over, you know, the pet toys or the grandchildren toys or the hard surfaces, the loose rugs, all help reduce fall risk. What type of device does someone need? You know, there are many different types of canes. Does someone need a specific type of cane? Do they need a walker? Might they need a wheelchair at some point? And what other equipment do they need in the home? I also think they play a very big role. We know this is a team sport. It's not only your healthcare provider team, but it's your family and loved ones. So education for everyone plays a big role. I'm just going to spend a moment on exercise. This is a very, very hot area in science these days, understanding that exercise may actually change our brain. It may change our brain chemistry. We know exercise releases good chemicals like endorphins. They make us feel happy and good, but they also may release dopamine and other aspects that are important in Parkinsonian conditions. This is a schema from a scientific text, but it also shows that exercise may reduce stress hormones. It may reduce inflammation. And we know those from a variety of animal studies. What do we know about humans? So I will say much of what we know comes from Parkinson's and not dementia with Lewy bodies specifically, but we would extrapolate and think that many of these principles still apply. These are a couple studies, some I've been involved with, some of the colleagues around the world, showing benefit for a variety of different types of exercise in motor symptoms of Parkinson's and non-motor, sleep, depression, anxiety, and perhaps also cognition. This was a review a couple years ago focused on Lewy body dementia. You can see there's only a handful of studies, and they're very small. I mean, 1 to 5 people that they looked at. So I hope research will help advance the field, but looking at, can exercise be done safely, whether it's walking on a treadmill or a bike or yoga, cueing, walking with a metronome or music to help one's gait. So we think there's benefit. We don't quite have all the evidence to prove it to date. And of course, if exercise were just a pill, we'd all be taking it. So, and with that, thank you for your attention to be able to share a little bit about the motor features and some of what we think we can do, both medication-wise, but also non-pharmacologically. And really, you know, if you are someone living with Lewy or a family member or friend with Lewy body dementia, it's a team effort. So finding that education, research, resources, your team is really critical. And I think that first step by being here today is part of that journey. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
This topic is on mood and cognition and is a lived experience.
The challenge is getting up on the chair.
Please don't watch
So I'm here just to assist Chris, really. I'm your assistant today. So Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And it's my privilege to be here and to be able to give you a talk today. I'm very proud to say that Rachel forgot to say that I'm an ambassador for the Lewy Body Society and also Alzheimer's Society. And it's so important to me to raise awareness about dementia. I was a police officer for 30 years, and I retired from the police in 2008 with my pension. Yes. And I'd like to think I was a good police officer, and I could certainly multifunction whilst I was a police officer, multitask. I can no longer do that. I carried on working when I retired from the police, and between 2013 and 2015 I had 3 minor strokes, which left me with some cognitive impairments. I had problems with my recall and my recollection memory. So things then started to get worse, and after the last stroke, I had quite a long time on the sick. I was working for a local government agency doing their law enforcement side of the business. And I tried to go back to work, and I couldn't remember how to access my emails. I couldn't remember how to get onto programs that I was using day in and day out. And I thought, something's not right here. And the only way I could describe it is that something was not right in my head. I won't go into detail, but I went to my GP, who said she was there for my physical health and not my mental health. And I left there in tears. A few months later, I was diagnosed with early onset vascular dementia in 2016, when I was 60 years old. I wasn't expecting to get a diagnosis that day. I remember hearing the word dementia, and I don't remember anything that was said after that. As soon as they knew in my place of work that I'd had this diagnosis, they were going to dismiss me. And I said, I've never been dismissed from any job. I'm not going to be dismissed. Cut long story short, after a few months, I was ill health retired against my wishes. And I didn't realise at that time they should have made reasonable adjustments to keep me in the workplace. I then moved in 2017 from, you might detect a slight Welsh accent, but not if you're from the States, because it won't mean anything to you. I moved from Cardiff in Wales, where I was living alone. I moved to Eastbourne to live with my partner, because I was struggling a little bit living on my own. And in 2018, prior to that, I was diagnosed with a vascular Parkinsonism, because I got a tremor in my right hand. In 2018, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and then in 2021, I was diagnosed with Lewy Body Dementia. Oh, I got dementia with Lewy Body. And I saw this, I kept asking to see a neurologist because I wasn't under a consultant. So I had more scans, I went to see her, and she said there was some deterioration in the my brainstem, I think. And after examining me, etc., she said, I think you have Lewy Body Dementia. So I said, well, do I or don't I have Lewy Body Dementia? And she said, it can only be confirmed on autopsy. I said, I'm afraid I'm not ready for that yet. So, but both times I received this diagnosis, I had no signposting, I wasn't given any information, and I had no understanding. I hadn't even heard of Lewy Body Dementia. So after my diagnosis, I got in touch with the Lewy Body Society, who gave me lots of information. And then myself and my partner, we got put in touch with this wonderful lady here, and they've been my lifesaver. Have I spoken too much?
No, too much. Thank you, Chris. So you have a number of symptoms. We've heard about different symptoms already today. You mentioned about your tremor, some of your Parkinson's symptoms. I know you have sleep apnea as well, and there's also visual perceptual changes. Sometimes struggling to judge distances. I know you talk about.
I'm covered in bruises, and she hasn't been beating me up, honestly.
But here, really, to talk about the way your diagnosis affects you. So we'll start off with your mood. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's affected your mood?
Yeah. From everything that Kevin was saying earlier, that could have been my story as well. And mood, I've always been a happy-go-lucky person. I was never stressed, I was never anxious. But suddenly these feelings of anxiety and stress kept coming over me and I couldn't understand why. Or I'd get very emotional and I was thinking, what's behind this? I didn't know. I find sometimes that my train of thought will suddenly go. I find it more difficult now to speak on the telephone because my concentration goes very quickly. Whereas if I'm on a Zoom meeting or if I'm doing a face-to-face talk like this, my concentration is held. And when anxiety comes over you and you don't understand why, it's an awful thing to have to deal with and to cope with. And I just want to say to Sis, she's still here, yeah. Thank you for your yoga because my tremor was really bad when I first came in. And after Sis's yoga session, look, brilliant. And depression, you know, I didn't understand why I was suddenly depressed and I'd never been depressed. And trying to multitask, and if Heather asked me to do 3 things, I probably wouldn't do any of them. Because in my head I was thinking I've got to do this, this and this. And I'd find myself going around in circles and not actually doing them. Have I kept it going?
Yeah, but we'll come to that actually, again, if that's okay,
Yeah.
Chris. But we talked before about this apathy that you feel, and I know talking to other people, that's something that's a struggle. What's that like?
I used to be a get up and go person, and I used to really look forward to doing things. And I do enjoy things now, but I never get that sense of excitement, real excitement of looking forward to doing something, or that real sense of enjoyment. And apathy comes into my life quite often. I'll wake up in the morning and we might have our day planned, and I just think, I'm too tired, I can't do anything today. I can't be bothered. And that's not how I was. I was never a can't be bothered type of person. And there have been occasions when we've had something planned, maybe going to visit friends, and I've been so tired that I have to say, I'm sorry, but I can't go with you this evening. And that's not fair on Heather. And I feel then guilty because I've let her down and let myself down.
So it really impacts on both of you.
Yeah.
You mentioned before about if somebody says, do this, do this, do this, that's difficult for you to process. How else has it affected your memory and your recall?
I have to write everything down in my diary. I keep telling myself I'll put it all in the calendar on my phone, but I haven't done that yet. And if I have an appointment at 10 o'clock in the morning, after that appointment, I've forgotten what I have on the rest of the day. So I have to keep revisiting my diary just to see what I have on next. I have to set reminders on my telephone for my medication and things like that. And Heather is a very good reminder as well. Or sometimes I do say she's a nag, but no, she's been very helpful. So yeah, it's about constant reminders to myself. And I need that, big attention.
So I'm conscious of time, but I'm just thinking, any tips? We've got people here with lived experience, we've got people listening to us. In terms of mood and cognition, what helps you keep going?
I'm a glass half full type of person anyway. So I try to see the good in everything. And I just want to raise awareness, and if I can help one person to not have to go through some of the awful experiences that I had, that's worthwhile for me. I feel that by giving talks, it gives me a sense of purpose in my life. When I had my diagnosis and lost my job, I lost my sense of purpose. And I say to people, please see the person and don't see the dementia. People say to me, you don't look like you've got dementia. What does dementia look like? And I sometimes like to say, if you just had 24 hours in my head, you'd understand what it's like living with Lewy body. And I think also what I find difficult is that if I'm stressed and somebody says to me, don't forget to do this, don't forget to do that, that's added pressure to me, and that makes me worse. So sometimes reminders, or don't forget this, or have you done that, it can be an added pressure. And I think the other thing that's important when I give talks is to say, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end of dementia. And I find when I give talks, people automatically jump to end stages, and I'm not there. When I go to medical appointments and they start talking to my partner and not to me, I'll now say, excuse me, but you're talking about me, please talk to me. So see the person and not the dementia. And one thing that sticks in my mind is somebody said to me, a person living with dementia may not know where they went yesterday, what they did or who they were with, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. So smile and be kind, because that costs nothing, but means an awful lot.
Thank you very much, Chris, for sharing. We are already out of time, but apart from this amazing crowd we have here, we have hundreds of people online. I would just like to invite Helen, Jennifer, and Cecil if you want to join Chris and Rachel just for a couple of questions. I don't know if we have any questions, but nothing from the online. Maybe anybody wants to ask a question to the panel today. Anything that you really want to ask today, this is your chance. Don't call back, so go for it.
I have so many questions, I don't know which one to start with, but I'll pick one of them. A number of the speakers talked about the use of kind of digital technologies as a way of supporting them, talking a little bit about visual cues, auditory cues. And I just wondered whether any of the panel members had any thoughts about the use of technologies going forward. Do you have any particular hopes, or does technology to support you fill you with trepidation?
I personally, I was actually part of my role in my prior life was the systems administrator. So technology is really vital to what I do or did do. And I know that it has significant roles. Number one, the availability of music, the availability of timing. A lot of times, people, let's say, with the profound Parkinsonianism, those people have episodes of what we call freezing. And what I found is music and a rhythm can help them unfreeze. Something as simple as tap on the shoulder, it just kind of brings them forward. With my sister, because I caregived 2 family members and then my third sibling, or my other sibling who also passed. What we would do is, if my sister would freeze, I would literally just get in front of her and I would mimic walking. But then we'd make it fun. I'd slowly start saying a rhythm to a marching song, and I'd say, swing your arms, stomp your feet, and let's get moving. And bingo, it would pull her out. So you could record that type of voice. We use technology for medication reminders. I had my voice recorded 6 times a day, saying it's time to take your breakfast medication. So there are numerous tools out there. A lot of people are using Apple Watches and other things. So there is a lot on the forefront coming out with technology.
Yeah, very nicely articulated. I think there's great promise, and we do use all those actually in our practice, with our patients and families, with our therapists. And sometimes it's just a little bit of creativity to find what works for you as an individual. It might be different. There are different playlists available. I mean, with search engines like Google, all you need to do is put in something and you can come up with, your tracks for marches or different types of music, different types of metronome, beats that could be all on your phone to help with movement. And I think we use technology too often for speech. So to help people speak louder. So one thing we know is people with many movement disorders respond better to external cues. So being able to see a target to reach, rather than trying to think of that target in their own head, having something like a game, where you want to hit that target goes a long way. So there are voice meters that you can have on your phone or iPad that will measure how much you're talking. And as you increase your volume, you'll hit that level. So that can often be a clue to help people speak louder. I think reminders are a big thing. And, sometimes it's getting the younger generation involved, grandkids or kids, to help set up that technology and know how to work it. And that's okay. It'll keep us all young.
Absolutely.
I find that I'm affected by loud noises and things that really have an impact on me. And if we're on a train and it's busy and it's packed, and I very often will tell the train manager I have dementia and I struggle with noise, and sometimes I get put into first class. But what I will do as a distraction, I'll play games on my mobile phone or on my iPad. And I'm finding once I'm concentrating on that, the noise and the amount of people around me diminishes. So that I find that works for me.
And for those people, just kind of a jumping off point, for those people that have that kind of stimulation sensitivity, and especially noise canceling headphones can be a huge benefit. Whether traveling, I had someone I was supporting whose husband wanted to go to a basketball game, but she thought he'd last 10 minutes. She bought a set of noise canceling headphones. He lasted 2 hours watching a professional game. So that can be, it will cause, overstimulation will cause the symptoms to worsen as those brain chemicals, the negative brain chemicals, start rising. So come up with some really innovative ways that you find that can help your loved one. Or we talked about quiet rooms during lunchtime, those moments away and then being brought back. That can make a huge difference.
The warriors.
Sorry, the warriors.
Yes. Sorry, just one quick one. To do with the noise cancelling headphones, you can buy earplugs that mean you can still hear the person next to you, but not noise around you.
One last question, because we're already out of time. But
the question is, a lot of physicians I've been hearing don't know a lot about Lewy body. Is there some sort of a question or, something you can do to, if it's a good person or not a good person, you know what I mean? Can someone finish the rest of that question? Is there some question you can do to test them? Like if you're on a bad date and be like, do I want to stay with this person or not?
Are you talking about interaction with physicians?
Exactly.
That you don't have confidence in at that moment?
Right? Does the person behind the door actually know about Lewy body, or am I wasting my time? Should I go up?
Seen that?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Come on. Yeah,
Healthcare systems can be very different across the world, so I would love your perspective as well. I at least know in the United States, fortunately, we are able to choose and pick to some degree. So I know if it's important to find a physician and healthcare provider person and team that work with you and your needs and your family's needs. Sometimes it's a personality. Sometimes there are all sorts of variables, but I think finding that goes a long way. I do think there are questions one could ask, to different degrees of years of practice or focus of practice. Sometimes on the web or advertisements or the videos people make, they give you some clues. I know we have in various societies lists of physicians with different areas of practice. I know word of mouth really goes a long way.
I was just going to add to that, and I think you guys point before about knocking on the door. So it does depend on which door you go through. So I think, we think from a neurology perspective, often things like the kind of neuropsychiatric things around sleep maybe, some of the cognitive things aren't picked up quite so well, whereas conversely, from a kind of psychiatric or dementia services, people are not very good at picking up the motor symptoms. So I think about finding out, it's not just about their experience, I think it's about their attitude So that if you find that people aren't inviting you to share, be informed. That's what I would say. Be informed. Equip yourself.
Ask for a second opinion if you're not happy.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is an option, but it's a really good question, and I think it's tough.
So the you sort of have a question for everyone, but the example I was just thinking is a good place in America. I watched some of the really videos family care. So some of the things that we showed in America or the campaign, what insurance cover this. So it's all right saying wonderful, here's something that's really good, but and it's quite confusing. It's probably the same general thing. Newcastle is pretty good that that bias obviously, but how can you get the right person if you insurance? So that was a problem in some of the videos that I've watched.
Yeah, I do think that I think there's globally a problem of access. I do know that different insurances and even across different states, California to Illinois, we have very different regulations and availability of based on insurance. So there may be limitations as to whom someone can see. I think that's where a lot of our efforts for education to try to train more people who are well equipped as healthcare providers with that knowledge, whether it's a physician, social worker, psychologist, nurse, like everyone on the team. And that's kind of maybe my other message, that we often historically have thought of, one provider. I think it's multiple providers of people who play a role in the care of someone living with Lewy's. So perhaps that might compensate too for other members of the team who maybe you have a better relationship with the nurse or social worker.
So get somebody on your side who understands your condition. And keep asking.
Yes, I just, as in closing, I just want to say also, my suggestion is to ask people in the community who know, because for instance, instead of not just saying neurologist, but a movement disorder neurologist like Dr. Goldman makes a huge difference, because they can usually diagnose more quickly versus a GP. And I'll just say, since you asked that question and you mentioned some that have links on the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center, we do list neurologists and geriatricians and neuropsychologists throughout the US, but also 17 different countries to help guide you. It doesn't mean that each one is going to be perfect, but hopefully it will help. So, but please, call the Lewy Body Society, Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center, all of us, if we can help. That's what we're there for, we want to help. So in the meantime, we thank you so much. Refreshments upstairs, and then there's a joint session in less than 20 minutes, about 15 minutes. You are welcome to watch it here or to join in the larger room with everyone else. Thank you.